For my final project, I was puzzled on what to do for a while. Then I remembered that my grandmother had recently asked me to recreate a garden sign that I made for her about 10 years ago. I decided that since I was already going to start that, I might as well document the process for class. This video will be going over some concept sketches that I made, the final design, stencil creation, cutting the wood, sanding and painting the sign, weatherproofing the planks, and finally, assembling the sign. This first collection of preliminary sketches includes different ideas for the orientation of the sign. Originally, I wanted to go with the longer horizontal option, but I decided that it was too lengthy. The vertical sign was too hard to read and just not a good look in general, so I settled on the shorter horizontal option. It has a classic look to it, and rather than the eye traveling from left to right as it would on the longer sign, the words are written from top to bottom, making it a bit easier to read. This was my first rough draft after I figured out the shape that I wanted. Originally, I wanted the sign to have a font similar to calligraphy or script, but creating layers of color would have been too difficult in terms of positioning the stencils without ruining any of the pre-existing paint. Additionally, I almost went with green lettering, but decided to change it in the next iteration as green wouldn't stand out enough in a garden. The sizing of this model was significantly smaller than the final product. Each side is 11 inches, making it a square, and I didn't like how boxy it looked, so I ended up changing it. When compared to the earlier design with the green lettering, this one is drastically different. First, I changed the font style to be a bit more whimsical, and it is now red for vibrancy. I replaced the O in Nonna with a tomato, as that is what she primarily grows in her garden. In terms of a color palette, the wood is a light brown with red and green, the green being there to add a small pop of contrast. The planks are now 3/4 of an inch apart to add some more style to the sign and also to prevent the wood from warping. The size is now 16 inches long by 11 3/4 of an inch wide, and each post is 29 3/4 of an inch tall, with a 1.5 feet exposed. The posts are attached using 8 screws, with 4 on either side near the top and bottom of the planks. In the previous sketch, I showed some lettering with lots of curvy shapes. In order to keep everything consistent, I decided that the best course of action would be to create some stencils from vinyl sheets and cut them out using my Cricut machine. First, I go into the Cricut application on my computer where I have the chosen font downloaded. I also have the PNG tomato file uploaded as well so I can implement it into my design. I size everything correctly according to the length and width of the planks, and then place a rectangle over the lettering and center everything using the Align tool. Then, the Slice tool creates a cutout version of the rectangle where the negative space is the lettering. After the first word was done, I simply repeated the exact same steps with the second word. In the end, the sizing of the font was 11 inches and the sizing of the rectangle was 11.5 inches by 5.5 inches. After all of my designing was completed, I transferred the file to my iPad and connected the device to my Cricut machine via Bluetooth. Then, I applied the vinyl sheet to the adhesive mat and loaded it into the machine. After the machine was done cutting, I used some vinyl peeling tools to remove the smaller unnecessary pieces from the mat, and then I applied a sheet of vinyl adhesive to the stencil. This will help me apply the stencil onto the wood later. I ended up having to remake the second word, so I printed it out on some orange vinyl and just repeated the exact same steps as before. To cut the wood down to the correct size, I used a table saw. I simply marked where I wanted to cut at the 16-inch mark and carefully sawed through the wood to get a clean, straight edge. Before I did anything else, I wanted to make sure that my surface was smooth for the paint, so I sanded both of the planks using a sanding block. Then, using the vinyl adhesive, I lined up the stencil with the wood, which I had marked beforehand with a line 2 1/4 inches from the edge of the plank on both sides. Then, I smoothed the vinyl onto the wood from one side to the other, making sure not to create any air bubbles. Now for the painting component. I used several shades of red mixed together to get the hue that I wanted, and then began filling in the color. I applied 3 coats of paint to each plank to make sure that it was opaque. After everything was completely dried, I peeled the stencil off to reveal the clean lettering. Then, I went in and added the green detailing for the tomato. Initially, I was going to use a pourable resin to seal the paint, but I couldn't find any that were available near me for a good price. So I turned to the next best option, which was this liquid acrylic spray. I used an adapter nozzle for a broader spray and then set the planks on top of 2 cardboard supports. I made sure to get a good even coat on the front and sides of the planks, then I waited for it to cure and sprayed the back sides. Before I could assemble everything, first I needed to trim the stakes down to the correct length of 29 3/4 of an inch. I marked the lines beforehand with a pencil and used a handsaw to make the cut. To align everything properly, I began by placing a 3/4 of an inch nut between both of the face-down planks to keep the spacing in the middle consistent. Then, I placed the extra piece of the stake at the edge of the board as a way to align the actual stake. After everything was in place, I made some drill holes where the screws were to go, and then added the screws and repeated it with the other stake. And this is the final product. Overall, I'm super happy with the end result. It's entirely accurate to my original concept drawing, except for the stakes, which are just a little bit thinner. The gloss from the liquid acrylic really brought out the color in both the wood and the paint, and the small space in between the planks, although minor, brings it all together.